Yeah, well, thank you very much. I just want to join my other brothers and sisters in congratulating the presenters so far. But I'd like to focus on one particular area which I think is nearer to the topic of our discussion, which is rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, as it were. And that particular issue focuses on the element of animosity that was raised by my brother Gaim earlier. I agree with him wholeheartedly, because there is huge animosity between the Eritreans and the Tigrayans at the same time. But I must stress the fact that that animosity is not a one-way is not a one-way road. The Eritreans, we Eritreans, have also our own biases and animosities towards our Tigray brothers. If there is any need for proving that, I would like to remind you a proverb that used to be shared by one of our small Yemeni shopkeeper. And I used to go there as a child to buy some coffee or sugar from his shop. And he used to say, "La ta'amana Tigrawai, yaw yakun 10 marra hayawai." That is what he used to say. Never trust a Tigrayan, even if he is 100% kind. But this is to illustrate the point that we've got this animosity on both sides of the border. It's not only the Tigrayans who are biased against the Eritreans, but we Eritreans are equally biased towards the Ethiopians. I think, having said that, we need to be very careful, as Professor Araya indicated, to focus on this looking forward to the future. And indeed, this is one reason why I was interested in joining this discussion. Otherwise, I wouldn't have joined it at all. Because this is a forward-looking activity, and we all Eritreans need to focus our attention and play our part in whatever way possible. But the important point that I'd like to establish is the fact that rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, or even between Eritrea and Tigray, should not be reduced to the level of one big brother and the other one a younger brother. In other words, and rapprochement should be on equal basis. I heard yesterday an Eritrean, I don't know where he is based, being interviewed by the Tigrayan radio on the website, on television. And he was saying that he regards both Eritreans and Eritreans and Tigrayans as people of the same kind, but occupying different parts of the country. I have no problem with that philosophy, so long as that doesn't lead to reducing Eritrea to being annexed to a bigger Tigray, a larger Tigray, and Eritrea being only limited to the highlands.
Okay, Tiani, that was my 3 minutes.
Thank you.
David?
Yes.
David, sorry, Nazi Mane, you've been waiting for a long time, actually.
Okay.
You can give him 1 minute.
I can see Naz's hand physically. However, time is also pressing as well. Naz, if that's okay, could we take Abdul Qadir's question, who I've got on Zoom, and then yours if it's very quick, and then we're going to take a break. So Abdul Qadir, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. I think in the background of what I was about to say is already Dr. Fissahi, Dr. Gaiman, Dr. Muhammad, they mentioned the background of it. I think it's inevitable, of course, to have the neighborly relations, and it has to be an excellent one. But of course, we have to be very careful when we talk about this one. Now we are talking on the back of the transitional period, how we're going to sort of, as Eritreans, to come together and things. So one has to be very careful. We take all these into consideration very seriously. There is no, as Eritreans, for example, you don't have to have a very requisite, for example, for us to have stability. My worry is when you have things like the one Kejel says, for example, he said, when the visitors comes commonly belonging feeling when they come to Eritrea. these sort of things, it's nice to have someone, anyone from outside Eritrea to have that feeling, as long as there is no sort of alternative sort of motives. Eritrea officially, or if you look at it formally, is well independent from 93 to 98. We had very short periods. We as Eritreans, we have a lot of things to do clearing among ourselves, let alone from outside. Let us first of all establish, strengthen our own relationships. The security issues or worry in business and things we are talking about, equally you find it from the Sudan side as well in the regional sort of things. So I think there is an emphasis to be, we don't have to enter into anything as a transitional period. And I think the conference, the idea behind the whole thing is to have food for thought from this one. For us, when we start day one, then we have to go forward with a very clear, we will have that relation. I think that's my feeling about it. Thank you very much.
Abdul Qadir, thank you very much. Can I just make a very brief observation before we go to Naz and then have the break? It seems to me that both of the last two people are mixing two slightly different things, in the sense we're talking about animosity between different groups, but foreign policy is about governments. So actually it will depend on what kind of government with what kind of vision comes into place. You know, if we look at Franco-German relations post-45, you couldn't talk very much about you know, love between the two peoples. That was the third major war they'd fought in the space of 80 years. But the governments approached it differently. Anyway, just an observation. Naz, we'll go to you, and then we're going to take a break.
All right. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. First one, what we have to look at is that there is no permanent friendship, permanent animosity between two countries. There's always they gamble and they change it. Although all of you have talked the past bitterness of among Ethiopian and Eritrean, why we are fighting here is not the history to repeat again. I agree with Dr. Araya. What we have to look for future. Are we able to erase Tigray from the geographical position at this present time? We cannot. Are they Tigray? They're going to erase us from our geographical location, Eritrea? They cannot. But we have to move on the coming future of Eritrea. How do we relate it and how do we work together without compromising our integrity and our boundaries? Because our revolution, our movement to get rid of Isaias, we have to have a side. That side is close border for us, Ethiopia. But Tigray. If we agree with Tigray without compromising our boundary, let alone the Badme will be solved later on, at this time we'll have a base to get rid of the dictator government. If we dwell in the past, we're going to stay forever as the way we are. Thank you, I'm done here.
Okay, Naz, thank you very much. By my clock, it's 4:37. I suggest that we now take a break for 5 minutes. So at about 4:42, 4:43, we'll reconvene. No doubt it will take a little bit of time. I can see Guy waving his hand. Guy, what's up? We'll then proceed with Martin's paper about broader issues of Eritrean foreign policy, the kind that Musi raised. And I do have a list of people who wanted to ask questions, and Guy, I'll add you to that when we come back. So 5-minute break, enlarging the discussion. And the remaining time is going to be taken up with, as with Shetel and Dan, a brief presentation from Martin, who's going to talk about Eritrea, the wider world, and their foreign policy, and its foreign policy, sorry. And then we'll go back to questions and discussion as before, although perhaps I'll be a little bit stricter in trying to keep us to the foreign policy agenda. Martin, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and apologies for not being right at the beginning. You know, it's one of the fascinating points about almost any discussion that people return to issues that they really feel deep in their hearts. And I mean, every session that we've had so far has dealt with the constitution, the relations with Tigray, and problems of land. All of these are clearly so deeply embedded in all of your hearts. And I'm now going to drift away from your deeply held convictions and deal with something else, which is Eritrea in the wider world. And in a sense, return to the issues that Musi raised very briefly, but I think correctly, because they are such an important point. I mean, I think one of the great problems for Eritrea is not an easy one to deal with, is, of course, you know, the fact that you have somewhere between 3, 4, perhaps a few more million people, and on the scale of things, you know, Eritrea is not a major issue for the world. It is, of course, a major issue for all of us, but you know, the rest of the world is, you know, there are many people, I'm sure, including Donald Trump, who couldn't even find it on a map, and that, of course, means that there's only a limited time and interest that is given to it. Having said that, let me just go very briefly through issues that you're very well aware of, but I thought I'd just raise them because I think it's important to see Eritrea in its wider context rather than just its narrow relationship with Ethiopia, important of course as that is. The first one is the relationship across the Red Sea, and you know, it is, of course, Eritrea used to have a good relationship with Iran, and that was dumped. And it is one of the interesting points about the way that Isaias works, that he is certainly very capable of making swift, dramatic gestures, and he will be in one situation in one moment and then change his relationship very quickly. And I mean, I wonder, you know, there was mention of the relations with Sudan. How many times have we seen relations mended, broken, remended, rebroken, bases given to opposition figures, then shut down? And he has this ability to operate across the region and sometimes far beyond that. That is quite astonishing. I mean, you know, I'm sure would come to as a surprise to most people outside of Eritrea that there was an Eritrean brigade that fought its way right the way across the Congo. What on earth were they doing in the Congo? And yet, you know, they had to be, in the end, rescued. Many of them died. But this is entirely forgotten. So Isaias has had an ability to project his power way beyond the size of the country and way beyond the region. That is just something that one has to bear in mind. Having dumped the Iranians, of course, he then got into bed with the Saudis and the UAE. There were, of course, very substantial benefits for both of those countries, but there were also benefits for Eritrea. We don't know how much they were given, but clearly there was substantial funds were given to Ethiopia, and we can be certain that Eritrea got similar amounts. In return, the UAE and the Saudis now have bases inside Eritrea from which they can operate. And these work in ways that I think is not entirely always understood by most of the rest of the world. I mean, for example, it is said that UAE used the base in Assab as a prison in which they can torture Houthi that they take and you know, extract information from, break them, and perhaps turn them against the people they were working with. The other thing that I think is really important, and there was a fascinating report that Bloomberg came up with quite recently, in which they pointed out that the UAE had conducted 37 secret flights from its own territory and the airbase in Assab to supply weapons to the Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar in contravention of the UN arms embargo. So Eritrea is then once again being used as a territory from which secret operations can be conducted. I mean, there have been many other examples of this in the past that have been hinted at, but this is one that seems to be pretty clear. The rest, of course, is, and I won't go into this in detail, is the relationship with Egypt and the relationship with Sudan, which is so rapidly moving and so much in flux. I mean, I can't possibly pretend to be on top of this because you would really have to be inside these ministries to know what role is being played. But it is not for nothing that the Eritreans were able to rely on Egypt for many years, going back to the beginning of the liberation struggle. And the reason was always the same. The Egyptians were determined that Egypt would not be deprived of its water, which is they now see the threat of. How this will be played out with the dam just about to be filled, perhaps as early as this month or even next month, we will have to wait and see. But there are all sorts of speculation and all sorts of rumors about where this is going, and this is a most dangerous position. The other two areas that are really important, one is the European relationship, which of course goes back such a very long time, but on the other hand has produced so little for the people of Eritrea and has produced so little for the European Union. It's one of the most extraordinary things that the European diplomats will work tirelessly to try and form a relationship with Eritrea, and President Isaias doesn't give a damn. He never has, and he never will, and he has never given any ground whatsoever. And they keep saying, oh, if only we could make a new breakthrough. We're going to have a new relationship. We're going to reform. We're going to have a better way. And he just sees this coming. And one of the greater strengths, of course, that he has is that he has been there for years and years and years. And the desk officers that deal with him have been there for a year, 18 months, 2 years, and then they're gone. And they don't have any institutional memory. And they just don't understand how they are being played again and again. And because the European politicians were so desperate to halt the outflow of Eritreans from not just Eritrea, but across the Mediterranean, they were prepared to do almost anything to improve their relations with Asmara. And so you had the Khartoum process, the whole relationship, the road building program, almost anything is offered to Eritrea. And the Eritreans just say, yes, okay, we'll take it if we fancy it, but we won't give you anything in return. And the European diplomats do their best and are constantly played at this game. It is really very distressing. And I presume that everybody is aware that this is now being challenged in two court cases, one in the Netherlands, one which Eritrea Focus is now actively pursuing in Britain, in which we will use anti-slavery legislation in order to try to halt this. But I mean, that's just said in parenthesis. The United States, of course, has had also a very long-term relationship with Eritrea, with Washington having a listening post at Kagnew to monitor the Middle East and the Soviet missile launches until 1977. And it has in the past been suggested that the US Navy would be interested in Eritrean ports, but this has not produced anything in particular. I mean, what is interesting in the relationship with the Americans is the Americans are also sometimes pretty keen to have a relationship with Isaias. And Yamamoto played a big role in brokering the deal between Abiy and Isaias. But at the end of the day, the Americans always let Eritrea down, certainly in the eyes of the government, because they will, in the end, side with the larger player, which is, of course, Ethiopia. And so the Eritreans endlessly feel that they are being shortchanged, and the fact that nobody was prepared to really enforce the boundary commission's ruling despite the fact that they had witnessed the Algiers peace agreement, was something of deep hurt for the Eritrean government, and I think rightly so. They really were treated very badly. But I'm afraid it is the reality of the world, and it is the parameters with which every Eritrean government will have to exist. So one of the points of this was the other two major powers, of course, that have a role in this. One is China, the rising power not just in the region but in the world, which already has its base in Djibouti, has relations with Eritrea, but they are not particularly strong. But will these develop in the future? They already have a major stake in the mine that's going to be developed in the Danakil. And they are buying up anything that they can in the mineral sector, and that is likely to increase its relationship with Eritrea. But how far that will go, because after all, they have good relations with all the states in the region, or try to have. So, I mean, I don't know how much of a leverage that will ever give an Eritrean government over the Chinese. The other one is Turkey. And, I think it is really important that people don't underestimate the role of Turkey and the Turkish ambition, not just in the region, but across the Mediterranean and the old Ottoman sphere of influence, which is really what they are after now. I mean, it is worthwhile, let me just run through very, very briefly who's on which side in Libya. You have the government in Tripoli, is backed by the United Nations. It's backed by Turkey with up to 6,000 Syrian mercenaries. It's backed by Italy, limited support from NATO, and AFRICOM, which is beginning to talk about possibly even having a base in Libya. On the other side, you have Khalifa Haftar and the National Libyan Army, as he calls it, backed by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, the Russians with mercenaries from the Wagner company and aircraft, France and Egypt. So you have a complete split there. Now, I only highlight that because it shows how in a critical moment, you can have an extraordinary range of powers lined up on both sides about the fate of a state which on the face of it has little interest for the rest of the world. I mean, what is Libya, for goodness sake? I mean, it is on the Mediterranean, it does have some, well, that's about the end of it. You can never tell when these kind of operations are going to come into your region and how you're going to respond. So if I might, David, I will just very briefly look at some issues that need to be considered. I mean, on the one,
a couple of minutes, Martin.
Just a couple of minutes, I promise you. A democratic Eritrea, which is what we're all looking forward to, would of course have to do the things that a normal country would do, which President Isaias doesn't. First of all, is put everything on a formal basis, where you have a professionalization of the civil service, a professionalization of the diplomatic service. Of course, they would answer to the government, but they would be professionals, and they would be trusted to carry out their relations. A new Eritrea would begin to revamp its relations with the international bodies, the United Nations, the African Union, the NGOs, organizations like the World Health Organization and or the United Nations subsidiary organizations. All of these need to be put on a firm basis where everybody knows where they are, and it's not a matter of the whim of the ruler as to how these things are undertaken. Secondly, Eritrea must stop meddling in its neighboring states. I mean, it's something that President Isaias is a past master at, But if Eritrea is going to be a respected member of the international community, it has to end these kind of things. Of course, Eritrea must pursue its own interests. I'm not suggesting that for a moment they should resile on that. In the long term, I think that a Horn of Africa free trade market, there is absolutely no reason why that shouldn't take place. It's been considered in the past. I mean, I have a book in my bookshelf just behind me which actually looks forward to that kind of relationship. And that was written in the early 1990s. So I think that, if we can get to a democratic state, and that of course is the big if, there is much that can be done to improve the relationship between Eritrea and its neighbors and between Eritrea and the international community. And then we can basically have what we all long for, which is a prosperous, democratic and safe country. Thank you.
Okay, Martin, thanks for that, and thanks for sticking to time. So we've got a good hour for discussion. If people would raise their hand through the Zoom facility, I and Paulos will see them. We haven't heard many female voices. Perhaps the first foreign minister of a changed Eritrea would be a woman, I don't know. Anyway, let me take the list as I've got at the moment. So first Paulos and then Guy.
Okay.
Good.
It's in relation to what the discussion between Eritrea and Tigray. I think we have to think in terms of Eritrean sovereignty. The whole armed struggle war against the repressive regime in Ethiopia, which is basically dominated by Amhara, Imperial Haile Selassie and Menelik. Therefore, we suspect now that Abiy's government is going to really annex Eritrea to Ethiopia. So right from the beginning in 1991, the Amhara ruling class have never accepted the independence of Eritrea. Now what we are doing is that we are jumping into relationship between people of Eritrea and Tigray. This is not a question. We have to ask ourselves our survival as a sovereign state. Therefore, what had happened is that because Tigray is under pressure from the central government, and we are also under pressure from Abiy and Isaias, that they are going to deal with the future of Eritrea, which basically is to sort of put it under Ethiopian sovereignty. So we have to choose for the sake of our sovereignty, even if in the past we have problem with Tigray, our future relationship depends upon forging a good relationship with Tigray. If Tigray is demolished or being won by the central government, with the central government is like unitary system, which we fought against, which the Sidama people fought against, which the Tigray people fought and the Oromo people fought against, then Eritrea sovereignty will be in danger. Therefore, two people under pressure, Eritrea and Tigray, we have to some sort ally ourselves. And we have to really don't have to see people to people. They hate us. They did this, that, ridiculous. Let's see forward. And politically, our stand is for peace with Ethiopia and with Tigray. But if we are under threat of peace, under threat of our sovereignty, and the same with Tigray, then our ally, direct ally, is going to be the TPLF, whether we like it or not. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Petros. Over to Guy.
Thank you, David. I think some of the things we said seems to have polarized. People reacted in a polarized manner. When we say the animosity between Eritreans and Tigrayans, we don't mean that is a static position. As you know, situations, alliances change, but we should not forget the past. Abiyo was saying, for example, we should just look towards the future. Easier said than done. If you have been following what Digital Tigray is doing, Tigray media is doing, the way they are using disgruntled Eritreans to denigrate Eritrea and the Eritreans. And the TPLF's position has always been shifting depending on their situation in Ethiopia. And also, my point of departure is Eritrea is not a homogeneous society. We have got different ethnic groups who have greater contacts with Sudan than with Eritrea. And Eastern Sudan, the role it played during the 30 Years' War, I don't think Eritrea would have survived without Eastern Sudan. Literally, the source of livelihood was Eastern Sudan. And they don't make a big noise about it. They just don't threaten us. They don't claim our territory. They don't, So as Eritreans, I think we should prioritize our interests. And the alliances we build should have their point of departure Eritrean interests. That does not mean we have to violate other people's rights. We have to be respectful. We have to have a healthy relationship. But if someone is trying to dominate you, like those people who are talking about the unity of Tigray and Eritrea, they are saying we should do whatever is with our means to erase Eritrean identity. And they are saying this in platform provided in the regional government of Tigray. So there are lots of questions that we cannot overlook. I'm not against Tigray, and I have never been. I have never been, and I have no reason to be. But I think as an Eritrean, my first interest is Eritrea needs to disentangle itself from the dilemma and problems it is in. And that solution will not be brought about by glossing over, by exaggerating the relationship, the brotherly relationship. What brotherly? There is a brotherly relationship, but there was a very ugly relationship too. Talk to the Eritreans in the border area, in Badime area. Talk to the Eritreans who have suffered during the border war. Consider the attitude, the hardened attitude of the TPLF towards Eritreans. Consider what the TPLF did when they deported Eritreans, including women who were pregnant and probably delivering in buses. Those things have left their scars. We have to look forward. We look forward not by forgetting our past. We build our future on our past. And the past is the present and the future are the continuations of the past. So we have more critical issues to deal with inside Eritrea rather than overstretching our limited means.
Okay, Guy, sorry, your 3 minutes were up. Just to flag one way I hear and read that in relation to some of the previous ones, I mean, we're talking on the one hand about cross-border relations between peoples that obviously will influence foreign policy, as in that case between Eritrea and Sudan, but Eritrean foreign policy as a whole is separate. It will be influenced by that. Anyway, I have Hussein Mahad next.
Yeah, my question is like, first of all, thank you for those who are organizing for this great event. Without them, we wouldn't be here today. My question is, I think we have a problem as Eritrean ourselves. We're talking about only a small region that like the Tigrinya side, whether in Okologzai and Hamasin and the Saraya area, which is Saraya and Okologzai, even the Tigrinya, they are not by themselves. They are with them, the Jabarti and the Saho Asaurta as well. So you've forgotten totally the big land that Samar and Barka and Sahel, those big areas, where do they gonna go if we have a big relationship with the Tigray? Tigray is a 6 million. Our Eritrean Tigrinya, not even like a million. So what are we talking about when we are talking about a relationship with the Tigray? Tigray, yeah, they are totally Ethiopian. If they are a country, they want willing to separate with Ethiopia, we can call them a Tigray. I think we are going far. So why we don't, first of all, think about the Eritrean. We've got no relationship together as the Eritrean. How could we ask to have a relationship with the Tigray? Tigray, they have a problem only with one person, that called Asias Afwerki. If Asias gone, we live in a peace and a great time with the Ethiopian. We don't have a mind to give them a border to take from our sea. We don't have a problem to deal with them in economy issues or anything what they want. But the problem is now, when even they said, Abiy Ahmed, when he said, I accept the Algerian agreement, in what way he accepted? If he don't return it back to Badime. Look what happening to us as Eritrean now. Look who is get benefit from the peace, what happened between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Eritrea gets zero. Even they take all the opposition from him, the Tigray and the Oromo and all of them. Even they take from him what happened even in Eritrea now, he didn't make any difference. Ethiopia, since the peace way, how many people they get in prison, how many activists they get back to Ethiopia. Eritrea, as Eritrean, we don't have a peace ourselves. How could we are talking to make a peace with the Tigray? I don't think we have a problem with the Tigray. As Eritrean ourselves, we've got a problem. How many Muslim people, how many teachers, they are in prison from the other side of the city? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Hussein. Could I just ask those of you that have already asked questions to lower your hands? You just click on the hand icon again on the bar at the bottom of your screen, and then you will disappear, and it won't be quite as confusing for Paulos and myself. So if you've asked a question already, please lower your hands. So I have Fikre Gaim next. Fikre.
All right. Thank you, David. Thank you for the insightful discussion. I think everyone in this conference understands the volatility of the Ethiopian or that region in general at this moment. That volatility, we don't know how it's going to, we don't know how it's going to shape, especially with the recent events that's happening in the past 2 years, specifically in the last few months, with the election, with the killing of the young Oromans singer. That region obviously is very volatile, and unfortunately for the Eritreans, the relationship between Eritrea and Ethiopia, or the relationship between Eritrea and the Tigrayan region, have divided us more than ever. And I think the focus needs to be here. The priority should be the unity of the Eritrean people, all ethnic groups, all religions. Some of the tactics that have been played recently is dividing the Eritreans, unfortunately, even making it harder to fight against the regime in Asmara by dividing the opposition leaning Eritreans ethnically and also religiously in the recent years. When we think about our foreign relations with Ethiopia, I think we have to think as a nation, not as a Tigrinya-speaking Eritreans in some parts of the country, and then Tigrinya-speaking Ethiopia. First of all, as far as we know, today, Tigray's region in Ethiopia is a killil. It's just one part of Ethiopia. We cannot have a specific relationship with that country. We can have a strategic relationship that could help us in the short term, but we need to think also long term. As far as the way we need to think about our past and future, I think we need to be forward looking, but also we should not forget our past. Unfortunately, the past is what dictates our emotions, but we have to be led by reason and use international standards of diplomacy and relations with our neighboring country, Ethiopia. And it has to be underscored. It has to be very clear that it's based on Eritrean sovereignty is clearly defined. There is no question about that. And then the relationship between the peoples and the countries could be forged. I think with a good intention of leaders, the people's problems could heal in no time. But the main problem have been the leadership in both sides of the borders that have been using and manipulating the situation to their own benefits to make their leadership or their dictatorship and tyranny longer in both sides of the border. So I think we need to have a permanent interest, but we need to divide it between a short interest right now to transition to this democratic Eritrea by overthrowing the current government, but also we need to think in that environment, we need to think about the future and build a stronger, longer term relationship. Even in the future, maybe there is going to be an East African trade bloc, which Eritrea, Ethiopia, and other countries would be part of, but the Eritrean sovereignty should not be under question. Thank you so much.
Okay, Fikret, thank you very much. Just again to try and steer the discussion a bit, I mean, Martin raised quite a few issues. There are some serious issues about alliances with other states, with international bodies, and we've barely touched on relations with the other side of the Red Sea. So I have Gabriel next on the list. Please, if you have already asked the question, could you lower your hand? You need to click on the participant box, and then you'll see lower hand on the right-hand side. Gabriel, over to you.
Thank you, David. You can hear me?
Yes.
I hope so. Well, I'm at a little loss because this is about foreign policy and international relations. So I think we will serve ourselves better if we can distinguish between the relationship between countries or nation states and the relationship between people. This is the relationship between nation states. So the history of Eritrea, where Eritrea is, that's what we have, but based on that, we have to craft an international relationship or foreign policy for Eritrea. And the factor that we should consider is we have to treat ourselves, no? Let's think about ourselves as sovereign people and craft our national interests and try to meet that national interest through diplomacy or international relationship. So when we talk about a relationship between countries, we are talking about our national interest, about Eritrea. And if we think about the relationship between people, and if you go to history, I don't think the relationship between Tigray and Eritrea, for example, the highland loves the Tigrayan. If you are going to talk about that, that's different. Let's put that for a different day. Let's talk about what we can do about Eritrea and its national interest, given the circumstance, what Martin talked about, because we found ourselves in this very volatile region. Many international actors have interest here. We cannot just get rid of that. So Eritrea was born into this area, and it's a unique circumstance, and we have to consider that. So how we can design a foreign relationship or foreign policy for Eritrea after the demise of the current government. Our problem is in fact, we are the people who should decide we don't have a government. That means the process of nation building in Eritrea was just, you know, we can sometimes, you know, you can say this, it was aborted, but some people may say it never got started. So that's our problem. It's not the problem of Tigray or the problem of other people. So that's our problem, and we have to deal with that. And once we do that, so the national relationship or international relationship is fully dependent on what Eritrea wants.
Okay, Gabriel, I think we've got your core point, and indeed it's important that we've talked about Tigray quite enough, and we now really want to focus explicitly on the remaining 45 minutes on...
Hey, David, we have questions here as well. You know,
yeah, okay. So we have some in the chat, some people are waving their arms. I've got...
raised my hand a long time.
Yeah, Araya. I've got Araya next, and then Dan wants to make some points, and then I've got Fisahaya.
Dan, sorry, David. Could I beg that we give some priority to women? It is outrageous that we've had so few.
Okay. Yes, but they do need to raise their hands. I can't force anyone to speak.
I've had my hand up. Yeah, David.
Kidane is raising his hand, but he doesn't seem to know that he could raise your hand through the Zoom room.
Sorry.
Because I'm co-host, I can't.
Okay, Helen, I apologize. I was wondering if it was just your pen in the air or a question. Let me, please, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand via the participants raise hand facility. But let's go briefly to Araya and then Helen, okay?
Thank you, David. First of all, let me really express my deep appreciation to Martin for his excellent presentation. My question is this, and I will make it short. Martin, what is it that you can tell us, those who are in the diaspora, who are opposing this regime, to win the support of the international community? I understand it is the Eritrean problems, to solve our problems by ourselves, but obviously we will need the support of the international community. There are several countries that will come to our help, but so far we have not been able to get any support from the many countries who should have supported us. So my question to you, Martin, is what is it that those of us in the diaspora who are opposed to this regime can do to win the sympathy and the support of the international community? Thank you, Martin.
Okay. Helen, do you want to ask your question first?
Yes. So basically, I mean, maybe it's more of a comment in my case, but we have the regional dynamics as it is. We have a long history with Ethiopia, negative, but at the same time, we shouldn't dwell in the past. Eritrea is a sovereign state, and while Ethiopia may be, we've had challenges, at the same time, we can see it as opportunities. Not only, you have Ben Amir in Eritrea, you have also on the other side of the border, Ben Amir in Sudan. So there is cross relations amongst the region. But the question is not that. The question is, how does Eritrea as a sovereign state position itself in the Horn of Africa and its dealings with other nations? So for me, I think if we are to look in the, for the future, I think the question should be, how do we devise a foreign policy strategy in our dealings, protecting the interests of the Eritrean people? Different regions have different ecological problems or different typographies. So taking into the context of the Eritrean people, how do we build relations with other states regionally, but into the Middle East as well? And how do we use that as opportunities and not simply that we're always victims of, people in the region, but how can we change the dynamics and contribute to the development in the region? So I think Eritrea has the potential to do it. The question is, how do we devise so that we position ourselves in a different way and can benefit from the region and not just to be a regional, country which is always fought over by superpowers, but how can we as a nation and a people position ourselves?
Okay. that's very clear, and it raises a couple of important aspects which we barely touched on. Is what is future Eritrea's relationship with the Arabian Peninsula as a whole, but more explicitly Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, both of whom have become significant players. And although Helen didn't make it explicit, there is a whole maritime dimension that we're missing out. That is not just foreign policy, but is economic policy as well. Look at your southern neighbor, minuscule Djibouti, benefiting massively from its relations, not just with the Horn of Africa, but with the whole of the African continent in terms of its diplomacy. Obviously, it is a member of the Arab League, but it's been far, far more effective at playing off superpowers as well as benefiting very significantly from a whole range of Middle Eastern players, both economically as well as politically. Anyway, on my list, I wanted Dan to come back briefly, and then Martin, if he's got any comments, particularly in relation to what Araya raised. Dan.
Some very quick ones and then a longer one on the U.S. relationship. First of all, I think we keep getting ahead of ourselves when we talk about political relationships and the future. The short-term need is for peace and stability, and that opens up things inside Eritrea. As several people have said, Fikre, I thought your intervention was very helpful in that respect. And then it's possible to build economic and other relationships with other people in the region and beyond, and take it from there, slowly by slowly. It's important not to forget the lowlands and Sudan, but it's also important to not forget the Afars and Yemen. Remember the other end of Eritrea? I just put that out there. On the national service and the EU, I have just been involved in a country conditions report for an asylum seeker in the US who was in the militia, who has been used on all kinds of government projects. And that is a form of unpaid labor as well. And it's a conscripted wing, basically, of national service by another name, the so-called People's Militia. Don't forget them when you're talking about this. On the US relationship and on Eritrea's relations in general, a lot of people have said Eritrea needs to act in its national interest. The same is true for every other nation. The national interest, though, can be perceived in very short-term ways and in longer term. I think a smart national interest policy is one that considers both, because you don't want to just be zigzagging between short-term transactional relationships. You want to build stronger ones. In terms of the U.S. involvement there, the U.S., first of all, I would say under Donald Trump, he's not paying much attention. And the reality is that the main drivers of U.S. interest in the region have been the policies and directions coming from the Saudis, the UAE, and Israel. The U.S. interests broadly are around counterterrorism and China. And in that sense, Eritrea is important for its stability, the long-term stability, and its relations with Ethiopia, and the extent to which a good relation with Ethiopia strengthens Ethiopia and opens up economic relations for the region. So you got to keep that in mind with a limited sense of what the possibilities are. I have been involved in briefings for Americans being sent over to Asmara recently, and everybody who goes there asks the same question: how can we open up the relationship with the U.S.? And they go over all enthusiastic, wanting to change things, and they get the door slammed on them. So I think that this is really a matter of when Isaias or someone else decides they want to change the relationship, and then build from there. But okay, in the short term, it's going to be other people that make the decisions.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Martin, do you want to come back very briefly or not?
Well, a lot of issues have been raised, some of them directly with me in the chat on the side. I mean, do you want me to take some of those up or not?
Not necessarily, but I think Araya raised an issue about how you see Western policy being reconfigured, or how to do it, rather.
All right. Well, in that case, I'll just take up that, and the points that you make about, and many people have made the point about national interest. And if I might refer you in a very sort of academic-y sort of way to a point that was made by Lord Palmerston when he said many years ago. Therefore, I say that it is a narrow policy to suppose that this country, talking about Britain, or that to be marked out as the eternal ally or the perpetual enemy of England. We have no eternal allies, and we have no perpetual enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual, and those interests, it is our duty to follow. And that, quite frankly, is the position of every country that has a legitimate government, is to follow the interests of their country. And that is the way of the world. I mean, somebody asked about, I think it was Dawood who raised the French-English relationship, which was one of great conflict. Or one could look at the relationship between Germany and France. They fought 3 world wars. They decimated millions of people. Do you not think they're friendly now? So, I mean, you have eternal interests, but you have no eternal friendships. And that, frankly, is the bottom line. Araya asked a really key question. What can we do to win the support of the international community? And this is, in a sense, the entire rationale of what Eritrea Focus has been trying to do, which is to try to bring people together, to bring not just in Britain, but we are now reaching out, and we have links with people in the United States. We've got links with people in Germany, in the Scandinavian countries, and in Israel. And we are trying to bring about this greater unity of people to work around particular issues. And I mentioned the one about national service, use of conscript, and Dan quite rightly talked about the People's Militia. I completely accept what he said about that. All these things, we're trying to bring them together. But I mean, in a sense, there's a much greater problem which lies behind this, which you are only too well aware of, which is the lack of unity amongst your political groups and the political movements. And until that is solved, and that's something that we cannot do, it's something that you have to do, but it is beginning to happen. I don't know, maybe I'm just an optimist, but it does seem to me that there is greater sense of unity and commonality of purpose. And the more that happens, the more you don't allow Isaias to divide you and to use his agents and his money to counteract the unity that exists in your community, you are in a really powerful position. And it's not just a question of holding the odd demonstration outside an embassy. There are much more practical things that can be done and that will be done if we can bring about this unity. And I think that is the way we can then persuade people. I'll make this final point, then I will wrap up. Look at the way in which the Somalis now have somebody in the American Congress. That gives them, I know she represents her constituency, but she's a Somali and she can speak up for them. And the way in which people are now beginning to get involved in British politics, young Eritreans, is fantastic. And that is one of the ways that you can begin to have your voice heard in the international arena.
Okay, thanks, Martin. I have Burhani and then Kidani. So Burhani first.
Yeah, thank you. My question has already been answered by Martin. What I want to say is we should not think about we don't need to have an eternal enemies. So sometimes when we talk about Eritrea, we only talk about what Isaiah thinks. So it is Isaias Afwerki who is giving us the topic. So sometimes he says the Tigrayans are our friends, and we say, oh, they are our friends. And when he says that they are our enemies, we say they are our enemies. But from my point of view, what I see is we should focus on our internal interests, our Eritrean interests, national interests. So we don't need to talk about these small things. Now that the more thing that concerns me is Isaias wanted to start a war against the Tigrayans, to maybe to support Abiy or to stay in power. So what do we do with that? What do we think? Is he working for our national interests? So that's how I always evaluate things. And of course, we need also to think about our neighbors, but we should always think about our national interests. That is the only thing that can unite us as a Eritrea sovereign country. Thank you.
Okay, Ronnie, thanks very much. Kidani.
Yeah, I was saying that I think I like Gaim's point that Eritrea needs to develop its relations with Sudan. To me, mainly because Sudan has very little claims on Eritrea. But coming to the Ethiopia-Eritrea relations, I have three specific questions. One is, what do you envision would happen to the peace and cooperation agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia in the event that Abiy does not win the next election? It seems that he's very unlikely to win it. And so what do you expect would happen to the peace and cooperation agreement? That's one. The second one is, I think, the troops in the border areas. I think Dan pointed out that Tigray somehow prevents them from withdrawing. That's a little bit difficult for me to understand because they are federal troops commanded by federal generals. We to understand that they are hostages to Tigray, or I don't understand how Tigray prevented them from withdrawing. My last question is, how would Eritrea-Ethiopia relations be if Tigray forms a proto-state, or in the event that it becomes independent? So in other words, Ethiopia, Eritrea, there would be a country between Eritrea and Ethiopia. So Ethiopia and Eritrea would no longer be bordered each other. So how do we envision Eritrean relations in the event that Tigray really becomes a proto-state or possibly an independent state? Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kidani. But actually, I'm going to suggest that we don't try and answer those because we've spent a lot of time on Tigray. Dan might come back to them later on, but instead try and look at these broader foreign policy issues. I commend to everyone Samara's comment in the comments where they raise a series of quite important issues about broader Eritrean foreign policy. So, Tawaldi, I have you next, and then Hatiab.
I want to latch on to what Hussein mentioned earlier, that I think the problem is that Eritrea needs to have peace within itself first. I think until we get, to speak with one coherent voice, like Martin said, nobody is going to care. I mean, asking foreign governments to help us without having, a coherent voice within, I don't think is going to fall on deaf ears. Recently, I heard that the Afars are going through tremendous hardships, and especially the UAE, I think, is imprisoning, Afar population on behalf of Isaias. And I don't see that being raised as an issue among the Eritreans. So how can we build this peace within? Then we'll ask, others to help. Is there a common ground that can unite Eritreans? I think we dwell on past emotions and forget the future, as has been exhibited in this comment. So maybe this is a different session, but how can we build this common ground that's relevant to all Eritreans, not just Highlanders, Lowlanders, and so on? Then there is an Eritrean identity that can speak with a coherent voice as to what it is that we are after. Because most often we get sidetracked into issues of the past, and 98, 99% of our conversation is based on that, and we forget the future, almost entirely, and we are making ourselves irrelevant because of that. And no foreign government is going to listen to us unless we get our act together first. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tewolde. As you say, those issues kind of stretch across all of the sessions, and if you weren't in yesterday's economic session, I commend Tewolde's overview of green energy to you. I have Habtab next, and then Naz, and then Fasahi.
Okay, Prof. Thank you, Martin, for giving us good oversight. I just want to ask a question. Provided that we can organize, we can establish the internationally active movement as one umbrella to represent the Eritrean opposition abroad. Like, if you consider this as global alliance of all Eritrean opposition, can we approach, for example, if it's possible, as you told us, ISAS is very clever in shifting alliances from Iran, from Qatar, directly to Saudi and Emirates. Can we also approach? Can we also establish a relationship with Turkish, with the Iranians, with Qatar, with Djibouti? Is it possible? And another to promote our struggle and to overthrow the current regime. As we know, the ETLF was supported by a lot of Scandinavian NGOs, the Americans. So that was a source of their a lot of money was given. So this was their backbone. And this was given in the name of assisting, the hunger people, or alleviating famine. At this time, Eritreans are all the way in Sudan, in Djibouti, in Ethiopia as refugees. Can we also raise funds from these previous NGOs, Scandinavians? And my problem is, how can we approach this? If your answer is yes, how can we approach? Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. More general points than foreign policy. So now to Naz.
Yeah, thank you. I could make them briefly. There are two ones. The statement answer for Mr. Dr. Araya. How could we diaspora people build ourselves together? That's very important. But how do they listen us to foreign countries? That was the issue. The foreign countries, they are not going to listen us unless we organize ourselves as an opposition group. As we see now, everything is opposition group, everyone, 10, 15, 20, 30, but we have to unite it. We have to reconcile ourselves. Once we do that, we need an international conference, globally, that will be speak like now we're speaking in English, where we invite our allies, friends, and everybody to let them know that we are ready to form government or transitional government in Eritrea, that we need blessing from them, and then to know us as an opposition group. Unless we do that, there is no way the Europeans, they can recognize us. Maybe one country the other way, the other country the other way, but we are not united. To add it, that we need reconciliation. On the other hand, you mentioned, Martin, that you only mentioned the danger we are facing, not Sudan, but the danger we are facing now is Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, which is as mingling in between them into create the dump of in Ethiopia. For example, I don't know if you know it, Isaias, first, let me go back. Egypt was one of the countries that are not recognized our referendum. This point in mind, Isaias, there was no any door that was not knocked to be friend with everyone in order to withdraw to crush Wayane. At that time, he made a relationship with Egypt. At that time, when he was making a relationship with Egypt, there was an agreement made between him, as he's doing now with Abiy, between him and the previous leaders of Egypt to give them the Rona Island. Rona Island is one of the Eritrean islands. Why he was giving them, did he sell them? I don't know. But at this time, the Egyptians, they claimed the agreement, which Israel has refused, because the political switched it off when Abiy came back. What do you call Israel? Just switch as his own methods to be friend with Ethiopia. So the Egyptians, at one point in time, they say, give us the agreement, but since he refused to give, they also say that we have our own way to take the island.
Okay, so now your time's up.
The Rona Island. So the danger is now, Sudan is switched with Egypt. Egypt definitely, if there is a war with Eritrea, as she has helped previously to Wayane, is going to involve to Wayane. Eritrea, by night, is bringing a lot of soldiers in Asab and Massawa, Ethiopian soldiers. His plan might be, hypothetically, if war started by front of Ethiopia, he might try to attack Tigray also through behind. In this case, if Egypt is involved in one of the powerful government in Middle East, the first thing to do is to destroy Eritrea, Eritrean military, in order to help Wayane. Then Wayane, they will serve in the front line. I thank you. I'm finished here. Sorry, I took a longer time.
Don't worry, don't want to be rude. Okay, so, Fesahai.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the clarifications which came earlier from Dan Connell, and Shettle is not here, and Martin for the great presentation. What I want to say is really Eritrean foreign policy, since our independence, has not actually started. As a nation, we didn't have a clear foreign policy which gives the country stability, peace, trade, good neighborhood, nothing. All the foreign policy of Eritrea was based on Isaias's whim and to extend his control of Eritrea. So the nation has not had that chance. So what we need to look now when we talk about building democracy in Eritrea is the transition as well as the future of Eritrea based on the characteristic of the Eritrean nation. It needs to reflect that character of Eritrea. Okay, we had a history which is based a very deep relationship with Ethiopia, and sometimes we do fall into that trap. Okay, but the relationship with our neighbors, with this rich Eritrea nation, which makes it important. I know Martin earlier said Eritrea is not a country which can be really important outside world. I know it is a small country, has less population, but it is very strategic country. This strategic country is influenced by the interest of different countries around us. So I want us to think about future of Eritrea. Eritreans, as Eritreans, we had better friendship during our armed struggle than when we had independent Eritrea. Okay, our neighbor countries were supporting us, we abandoned them when Isaias came to power. Okay? And then he picks and chooses. Okay, the Arab world, they don't have the stability they had earlier, so maybe they are in a mess themselves, but we didn't have a good relationship with them. Sudan, I think we have two neighbor countries, which is Ethiopia, we were talking, Sudan, which we didn't talk much, a big market for Eritrea. If we have a policy which is based on peace and stability, I think Eritrea can live within these two countries in peace. And then we can use as well our Red Sea. So, of course, I come back now on the real issue about us. I think the opposition have started now to realize after 30 years of quarreling each other, they are starting to come up with agreement which is to be uploaded. And that is what essential thing, okay? Our move have to reflect on that. We have to move on so that we define this Eritrea in order to live in peace, stability, and to reflect its foreign policy based on its character, as are Eritreans who are really not given the chance because of the dominance of PFDJ. We need to think of how we can live for future. So I think this is a good start. It's not really, we haven't, but we need to realize we have made a bad start. Okay. We have abandoned those who helped us. So I think this is where we need to look.
Okay, sorry, I'm cutting you off because you've had the time. So I can see some people with their hands still raised from before and some new hands, including Tiami. I can see you physically. Myself and Paulos can't see all the screens at the same time, so it's better if you use the facility on the right. However, before we go to Tiami, can I just raise a kind of more direct thing about the formulation of foreign policy? As soon as the government changes, whether there's a one-person dictatorship, or whether you have this lovely liberal kind of democracy that Martin and others are dreaming of, you immediately have foreign policy choices. One very important choice, which is as much a constraint, which we haven't touched on at all, is the United Arab Emirates. Which country stepped in on the change in Sudan? UAE, because there were already Sudanese fighters in Yemen where UAE was. Yeah, the UAE and Saudi both have projects ready to go in Assab and elsewhere. The UAE will step in with cash. So there's an immediate question about what kind of relationships with which Arab powers the day after a change. Similarly, we haven't discussed relations with IGAD. Will a new government want to reintegrate with IGAD? Etc. There are some pressing issues and we've got very little time now. Anyway, over to Tiami.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, okay.
Right, thank you very much. I heard Martin quoting the famous British former leader, Palmerston, and I'd like to follow that by a quotation from Churchill, which I think is very relevant to the situation we are discussing right now. And Churchill talks about vigor during the Second World War, and he says, I quote, we should lay aside every hindrance and endeavor by uniting the whole force and spirit of our people. I think that highlights the significance of Eritrean sovereignty, Eritrea as a sovereign nation state, and of course we're counting on the wisdom and the inspiration of the so-called democracy. My point of view is that without establishing a sovereign Eritrean identity which incorporates these various diversified units, parties, groups that we have, we will not proceed far. But my main focus this afternoon has been really following the parameters of the discussion. The discussion is on the rapprochement, and then there was some reference to the policy, the foreign policy issue. Well, I believe this is a good start, and we've made a good opening, but as it were, because we need to discuss all these options. We should not leave any stone unturned, whether it's vis-a-vis the Tigrayans, vis-a-vis Abiy and his party, or the rest of Ethiopia. For the time being, we don't know the situation in Ethiopia. It's quite fluid. And for the time being, I suggest that I hear some of our Muslim brothers suggesting, giving an indication that there is some misunderstanding amongst us, amongst Eritreans. And I agree with that. There is some misunderstanding, and I think we need to put our own house in order there. And my suggestion is that until we know what sort of Ethiopia faces us in the future, whether it's in the form of a liberated Tigray or not, or whether it's a federated Ethiopia, we need to use this time to know each other better. And I suggest that we should set some platforms for discussions between Eritreans and within ourselves, so that we eliminate this fear of neglecting the Samhar and the other parts of Eritrea. Of course, for me, Eritrean sovereignty is not for sale. And I think it's important that we really pull together our resources. Otherwise, given the situation that we face, Isaias and Abiy and the Tigrayans, we are not going to we're not going to move forward too much. And I think that unity is significant. And how do we build that unity is perhaps a question to the experts, and that has been asked by Professor Araya, and I don't want to repeat that. But the important point to me right now is not really ignoring the rest of Eritrea, but focusing, given the title, Rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, we need to create a roadmap that would allow us to build bridges between Eritrea and our neighbor Tigray. But this is on the understanding that we stand firm on our 2 feet as a sovereign state.
Okay, Tiami, thank you very much. Right, we are almost out of time. I want to go back briefly to Dan and Martin if they have any wrap-up comments. I don't have any new hands up, although Theodros, I can see, has asked again. So before we go back to Dan and Martin, can we go to Guy? Have you got a question or not? I could see you waving earlier on. Doesn't look like it. Okay, Theodros.
Me now?
Yep, Theodros.
Yes, a brief comment. I didn't say much. I was hearing a lot of the interesting comments, but I believe it's important to realize that the interest of the people of Eritrea and that of their neighbors, be it in Ethiopia, Sudan, Djibouti, or are the same. And that's the ameliorating poverty and creating a good living conditions for their people. If they are not the same, they are often complementary, and that means they are open for negotiation. And they are never mutually exclusive. There are many people who think that our interests are mutually exclusive. That's a little far-fetched and will only lead us to conflicts. The other is the boundaries of Eritrea, like the boundaries of Ethiopia, Sudan, or all the neighboring countries are delineated by colonialists without taking consideration of the ethnic and linguistic distinctions. Therefore, we have people of the same ethnic groups. The Afars are on both sides of in Ethiopia and Eritrea. The Sahos, the Kunamas, and the Tigrayans are on both sides of Eritrea and Ethiopia, as well as the Beja Ben Amr. And therefore, the issue becomes, how do we create a national? We know that the colonial boundaries are sacrosanct. This is the base of all African states. And the issue then becomes, how do we create a nation state of our multi-ethnic groups, while at the same time recognizing the strong relationships with our neighbors. I think it's important to realize that the only thing we can, if we have peace and security in our country, then we all can feel peace and secure in the region. So it's a little. We have to change our paradigm of thinking. Thank you very much.
All right, Douglas. Thank you very much. Right. Can we go first to Dan?
Sure. I'll try to keep this very short. One of the central questions that keeps coming up is how do we get people to support Eritrea and to support us? I think on balance, the answers are right there in front of us, as many people have been saying, and that's unifying the opposition. There are two kinds of people who will support Eritrea and us, basically. And one of them would be those who would be interested in humanitarian or fairness issues. And they would be interested in the issue of national service as slavery and refugees. And so that's one group, that's a humanitarian side. The political people, the countries that you might be interested in, are not going to be involved in that, except insofar as refugees are an issue for them. So the Europeans have an interest in stemming the refugees flows that coincide with our interest in protecting them. But that's one area. The main question they're going to have is shared interests. And in that respect, there is the question of Eritrea. There's also the question of Eritrea focus and the broader opposition. And in the case of Eritrea, I mean, we've been through that. But in terms of the opposition, why should anybody support anything that any of us are concerned about or do? You need to convince people that we matter, that we can make a difference to them and to their long-term interests. So you have to be able to answer the question of why and how. It could be that it's got to do with being able to marshal resources, human resources and other resources, to help put Eritrea back together again afterward. It may be that you have an angle on working with the refugees in Ethiopia and Sudan. And it may be something else, but you have to be able to answer the question of why should anybody care from their standpoint. And if you can do that, then we have the answer to this.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Martin, do you want any final comments?
Yeah, if I may. I mean, I very much agree with Dan. I mean, you've got to ask. It's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. You've got to ask people why they should care, because it matters to them. And that was why I raised the point of the diaspora. And if I might, I think that there's one other thing I would suggest that a future Eritrean government should consider, and that is to build on your diaspora. I don't know if you know, but the Indians grant special status to their own diaspora. They give them foreign, essentially, passports and citizenship in their own country, even if they've lived abroad for generations, because they see them as an asset. And I think that you could do that for your own people who are going to, because many people are never going to come home. And you need to consider that. For example, would you do what the French do to their citizens, but which I'm afraid the British don't do to theirs, which is to offer to have a member of parliament in Eritrea who does nothing but represent your diaspora, that they would represent their interests. That would then link them up. And if you can make these kind of promises to people and say, look, we take you seriously, then I think you have a long way to go. Finally, I would just say, Professor I couldn't disagree with you more. Eritrea has had a foreign policy. It has had a terrible foreign policy, but a very effective one. And Isaias has used all of his manipulative, undermining skills with great effect to persuade his neighbors that if they don't take him seriously, he will be a complete pain in the arse. And he will destabilize them, undermine them, and they'd better listen to him. And he has, in a sense, used the refugees in Europe in exactly the same way. And that's how he's got their attention. And to say you're going to be nice guys, yeah, it's nice, but who's going to take any notice?
Okay, Martin, thanks for that. So we do want to finish on time. So it falls to me, and I guess I should obey Martin and put my picture back on, to thank everyone. I mean, thank you everyone for taking the time. I mean, there is a session tomorrow, Working Together, which will address some of the themes that some of the people there at the end have been raising. My apologies if we missed any questions between myself and Paulos and the hand-raising facilities. But a more specific set of thanks to the organizers. Helen, Dawit is there somewhere. Kiflom, who helped out yesterday, as well as Paulos and Hapte. So there's been an awful lot of effort gone into this behind the scenes. So thanks very much to them. Hapte, if you are here, is there anything else you want to say, or Helen, just in terms of kind of business matters for tomorrow and beyond?
David, I think Mobrahatu is going to say a few words. Mobrahatu, are you still there?
Yes. Thank you very much. I was writing the notes, so I didn't have any chance to ask a question or put forward any comments. I remember in the early 1990s, Isaias was asked by a member of the audience why the foreign diplomacy of Eritrea was very weak. And Isaias' answer was very blunt. He said, in Tigrinya was very alarming, in an alarming way, and he said that we have no people, we have no capable people. But the truth is that the foreign diplomacy, the internal diplomacy is dominated by Isaias. It is his own remit. So he doesn't allow any competent minister to work independently. And that's what happened after the war in 1998. Like Foreign Minister Haile Selassie worked very, very hard to bring about the border, to stop the border war with Ethiopia, but also bringing in the international community and peacekeepers in Eritrea, which Isaias was not happy about. With regards to the discussion, except mentioned by Dan Connell regarding the Afar people, it was not discussed as deep as I wanted it, because I believe Asab or the Afar region is the start and the end of Eritrea, if there is an end. As you know, the Afar people are marginalized in Eritrea. They are marginalized in Djibouti, but also marginalized in Ethiopia. At the moment, at least Ethiopia has provided the Afars to have an autonomous unit, and the Afars in Eritrea are looking towards that Afar state in Ethiopia as a secure place of security. Probably the number of Afars in Eritrea is maybe around 200,000. Out of this, around 60 or 70,000 have moved to Ethiopia, and the Afar region or the Danakil region of Eritrea is quite vulnerable at the moment. Finally, what I want to add is we've discussed that you mentioned that the foreign diplomacy is an extension of the internal or the local diplomacy. And many of you have mentioned that first we have to focus on our internal issues and then look forward towards strengthening the relationship with Ethiopia, with Sudan, or other countries. I agree with that, and there will be a session that's called Working Together on Saturday, and that will involve a lot of Eritreans, especially people from the ethnic groups, religious leaders, but also representative of the opposition members and also political parties. And that could be a good start towards the promoting internal diplomacy, and then we can take it further from there. And thank you very much. It was a very, very good session.
Okay, thank you, my brother. I must apologize. Sorry, I wasn't reading my program properly. Okay,
David, I have asked for 1 minute chance.
Sorry, Araya, but you want to raise a question or what?
No, it is an idea that I want to share with the group.
Hapte, is that okay?
Yeah. Okay. It's a very brief one. You know,
only briefly.
We have both Martin and Dan have made it clear that the diaspora opposition groups need to cultivate some relationship and support from the from the international community. So what I'm suggesting is, as you are aware, you know, the Eritrean Research Policy and Strategy Institute is calling for people to participate in think tank groups. I am now proposing that people should really join that group so that we can form a think tank group that will cultivate a relationship with the international community. And so I'm just urging everyone who can really contribute to that end, you know, to subscribe to that and respond to the call that has been issued by the Institute of the Eritrean Research Policy and Strategy. Okay. That's all. Right. Thank you, David, for giving me this chance.
Hapte, do you want to add a final word or shall we close?
Well, all I'll say to Professor Araya is point noted, and we would be more than happy to work and collaborate with organizations that are like-minded to what we want to achieve and building a democratic Eritrea. So we would be very, very happy to talk with you and others, Professor Araya. Thank you.
Okay.
Just Alan has his hand up, David. I'm not...
David?
Okay. Well, look, yeah, go on. Paulos, can...
Yeah, I mean, we can before we wrap up, we can give final 10 minutes. Is that okay with you? I mean...
I was trying to...
Just final 10 minutes, but we're going to... Final 10 minutes.
I think we are close, isn't it? What do you think, Hapte?
I think we should close.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, then. That's fine. In case
okay. The extra time was really a buffer if we didn't meet what we had to do. So, look, thank you, everybody, wherever you are in the world, for sparing the time, providing the ideas. There's actually quite a lot of synergy between the different groups, as those of you that have been in the other groups as well. So, thanks for your time. Thanks for your ideas. And no doubt see some of you tomorrow. Keep safe.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Good session.
Thank you very much.